With this blues soloing guitar lesson, we'll show how to solo outside of the standard box pattern to new areas of the fretboard using a diagonal approach, with fretboard diagrams, practice jam-along tracks, and song examples by Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, and Led Zeppelin. We'll cover it all with the step-by-step approach. From our previous lesson or level from our blues soloing playlist, we showed how to construct the blues scale from scratch to cover the complete fretboard. And with that, we now have a complete pentatonic minor pattern, which is going to provide the blueprint for all scales and box patterns on the fretboard that will harmonize within a key. So the next step is to become familiar with using the complete pattern, and the best approach is to focus on one section at a time, one step at a time. And with that, we're going to apply a new diagonal approach to soloing with the blues scale. Now, before we get into the diagonal approach, we should do a quick review of the standard blues box pattern, just so we're on the same page as to where we're starting from. A lot of people, when they first learn the blues scale, they'll learn it in A, and they'll learn this pattern. Where you may throw in, some people learn it with an extra note. Regardless, that's a pattern a lot of people start with, and that's what I refer to as the standard blues box pattern. And it is a great pattern because it fits the hand like a glove. And once you learn that pattern, maybe you learn a few riffs. But then after you get a little bit familiar with the pattern, you want to start spreading out a little bit. You want to go to other areas of the fretboard. And the thing is, as far as having the fretboard mastered and knowing how to solo over the complete fretboard, you already have a span of 3 frets with this box pattern. In addition to that, everything repeats every 12 frets on the guitar. So this same pattern, I'm on an acoustic right now without a cutaway, but from the 5th to the 17th fret, if I had electric, I could do that. So you're going to have everything repeating every 12 frets. So what I'm getting at is if you have this box pattern down, we just have to cover an area of 9 frets. And let's go to a different key, the key of E blues, and show a real good example of that empty span, that empty area of 9 frets. With E blues, you can play it along the open fret position and then also along the 12th fret. If you look at the diagram here, again, everything repeats every 12 frets, and if we're familiar with the standard box pattern, we have a 9 fret span that we want to cover with this lesson. And again, we're going to approach it one step at a time, and we're going to do that with a new box pattern, and we're also going to apply a new approach, the diagonal approach. Now, as the first step, we're going to take a section from the complete pentatonic minor pattern in E. And with this pattern, we call it a diagonal approach because the general direction of the pattern and the riffs we're going to play is not going directly across the strings. We're going to sort of go from a diagonal direction. And if we were to take this pattern and flip it around to a vertical view, I think this will help a little bit more for this lesson. We're going to focus on this particular pattern. And if you note the dots inside the circles, those indicate the root notes. And this will be the foundation for this lesson. We're going to learn the diagonal approach in E initially, and then we'll show you how to play it in any other key as well. What we're going to do in the upcoming clips is we're going to learn how to play 3 blues riffs with the diagonal approach, and we're going to practice these riffs or hear how they sound or harmonize with an E blues backing rhythm track. So starting off with the first riff, which we'll call riff number 1, we're going to start on that bottom string, 5th fret. And following the pattern, if you look at the box pattern, you'll notice 3 consecutive whole steps going across. Well, now we're going to switch to some tab. These notes are going to be played within the pattern. And this riff begins, we're just going to focus on the notes to start, and then we'll do the timing. 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7. So we're going across one string at a time. 5, 7, next string 5, 7, next string 5, 7. And then we're going to descend down the pattern. So after the 7, we go back down to 5 on that same string, and then we end going down to the 5th string, 7th fret. Let's call off the fret numbers one more time. 5, 7, next string, 5, 7, next string, 5, 7, then descend down, 5, 7. And you'll notice the squiggly line there. We want to add a little vibrato. The key to vibrato, 2 fingers, gives you better tone and control. Now as far as timing it, now you know what to play. Tempo or timing, counting it off helps a little bit to make it sound, the riff sound a little bit better. What I mean by that, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. How about one more? For riff 2, we're going to extend the box pattern. We're going to start off the same with the 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7. And then the next note, if you look at the tab, you'll see a slash mark with the number 9. What we're going to do is we're going to start from that 7th fret. That's going to be the slide to 9. So if we back it up from the beginning, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7, pluck 7 again, but immediately slide to 9. And then we're now along the 7th fret position, so we've got a 7, 9, 7, 9 here that fits the pattern. After the slide, go to the next string, 7th fret, and then same string, 9, to end things. We're going to apply a little vibrato there because that's the 2nd E root note. So I'm going to back it up just to the slide part. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Here's the complete riff. I'll call off the frets. 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7, slide, 7, 9. We had to count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. One more time. For riff number 3, we'll start with the same note we ended riff number 2 on. That's that E root note on the 3rd string, 9th fret. Riff 3 will be a descending riff. We're going down the pattern with a diagonal direction or approach. And starting with that root note, I'll call it the frets, we've got 9, 7, then we shift down a string and go 9, 7 again. So back to the top, 9, 7, 9, 7. Then we're going to pluck that 7th fret again and slide it down to the 5th fret. But we're not going to pluck the 5th fret. We're going to sound the 5th fret, but that's why if you look at the tab, you'll see the 5 in parentheses. That means the note is sounded but not plucked. So from that 7 with the slash and the 5 in parentheses, that's what this is. And then as we continue on, we're back again. We're still staying in this diagonal pattern, this box pattern, 7, 5, all the way back down to the beginning. And then we're going to jump up to the 5th string, 7th fret. This is, for a lot of you, if you've just been playing within the standard box pattern, this phrasing, focusing on the root note, in this case E. A lot of people, when they first learn to phrase, when they stop on a root note, it's either like an ascending riff and then the last note is a root note, or a descending riff, last note is a root note. What I intentionally do with this riff is, we're ending on a root note now, but kind of jumping up to it. Another thing you may notice, there is a slash before that 7. Once you can do this, that's a good way to get acclimated, but we want to throw in a little bit of a challenge here. An additional challenge is to, instead of just hitting that root note, sliding up to the root note. And what that requires, slightly lifting your hand out of position. You want to get that 3rd finger down with the middle finger next to it, the 2nd finger. Again, get good vibrato, more control, and better tone. Let's put the whole thing together. I'll call off the frets to start. 9, 7, down next string, 9, 7, slide from 7 to 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, slide up to 7. If we had to count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. the next clip we'll practice combining all three riffs together and playing them along with a backing rhythm track. And for those of you who haven't done a lot of jamming before, this is going to throw you off because it's hard enough to concentrate on a riff and play it correct, but when there's a backing rhythm, it can throw off your concentration a little bit. So the best approach to that is to plan out your running order of riffs beforehand. And the running order is going to follow exactly the order in which we learn the riffs. Riff 1 followed by Riff 2 and Riff 3. One little twist to this is we're going to repeat Riff 1 to end everything. And not only that, on Riff 1 we're going to add an extra note. It's going to be this. So basically, dun dun, hitting the root note twice just to emphasize a good harmonized ending. But what we're going to do now is let's practice putting all three riffs together. And here we go with the slow walkthrough, starting with riff number 1. Riff number 2. Riff number 3. Riff number 1 for the ending. Let's do it again. This time I won't call off the riffs. And ultimately, you want to be creative, a little more creative with these riffs, making up your own. But as a first step, you just want to see with the next clip if you can keep up and follow the riffs. There'll be two guitars playing, or two clips you can view. There'll be the rhythm guitar, and then there'll be a clip of myself playing this running order we just rehearsed. And the objective is, if you can follow along and keep up with that clip, then you'll be ready for the next challenge to add some variations to these riffs. Now the next step is learning how to improvise with these riffs with the diagonal approach. And asking you right now to create your own riffs is asking too much. If you just learn a riff, being creative with them is going to take a while. So what is that in-between ground between copying a riff verbatim and improvisation? I can summarize it in one word: variations. And if I had to add two words, it'll be slight variations. In other words, we take the foundation of the riffs that you've already learned, and then we alter them slightly. Again, add a little variation or color to the riffs, and that acts as a springboard to give you more creative ideas when you start coming up with riffs on your own. So in the upcoming clips, that's what we're going to do. We're going to work on some variations, and then ultimately we're going to have another rhythm track that'll go for 3 verses, much longer, where you can try everything out. A good first step with variations is to simply rearrange the running order of the riffs you learned. So what we initially did with the riffs, the running order was Riff 1, Riff 2, Riff 3, or 1, 2, 3. Well, you can play those in any order you wish, and what's good about that, it gets you more familiar with the box pattern, but it also breaks you out of a rut of repeating the same riff all the time. So let's do an example here where we're going to play them in the order of Riff 3, Riff 2, Riff 1, and here we go. Then Riff 2, and Riff 1. Let's do that one more time, starting with Riff 3. Riff 2. And Riff Of course, there's other variations, 1-3-2, 2-3-1, whatever works. You could try out different variations. You can always pause the video, but this would be step one, working with variations, rearranging the riffs. Now with variations, the best way to start is with slight variations. In other words, taking a riff that you already know and just altering it or adding maybe a 3-note or 2-note or even just a 1-note variation. Let's do examples with the first 3 riffs we've covered. The original riff number 1. Well, variation could be to add just 2 notes to that riff. The extra 2 notes would be going down to that 5th fret and then back to the root note. Bum, bum. Here's how it'll sound. Again, a slight variation, but again, it gets you out of the rut of repeating the same riff. Here's a variation for riff 2, the original riff. And then if we extend it a little bit, again, staying within that diagonal pattern, but just extending it a little bit more and ending on that E root note again. So here's the variation for riff 2. Now with this riff 3 variation, we'll actually take away notes from the original riff. Here's the original. Here's the variation. Adding this 7-5-7-7, next string 5 down to 7. Another option with adding variations is to apply various blues techniques to the riffs, including bending, vibrato, hammering, and pulling off. Let's apply those to riff number 1. Going back to the original riff. Well, if we applied a bend here, a good note to bend within this pattern will be that 4th string 7th fret. I did a bend and release. I've covered bending technique in previous levels. Quick review, have those fingers scrunched together to give you better control and tone over the bend. Multiple fingers for bending. And apply a little vibrato to that root note. So this variation, if we applied some hammering technique, if we went to the 5th string 5th fret and did a hammer between the 5th and the 7th fret, and then partial bar, that first finger sort of flattens to the next string, the 4th string. We're going to play this 3-note combo here. The 5-7 would be the 1-2, and there's your 3 count. And we play that 3 times in a row. And then a root note. Well, if we put it all together, starting with the original riff. Here's the original riff 2. What we could do instead is apply some hammer and hammer pull-off combos following the same riff, but we're going to do that on within the first 3 strings. Here's what I mean. So instead of plucking each note, we're doing hammer. And then on that 4th string, we're going to do a hammer pull-off. Let's do that riff again. From the original riff number 3, we can do some hammer pull-off combos and delete a couple notes. In that riff, a hammer pull-off. Another option with variations is to add passing tones to the riffs. Now, passing tones, they are not part of the pentatonic minor scale. They are extra notes that you can add to create a sort of off-balance effect to either a blues solo or a blues riff. Some famous examples of blues riffs with passing tones that you've heard: Sunshine of Your Love by Cream. Right there. Black Dog by Led Zeppelin. Right there. And Wipeout by the Safaris. Right there. Now, when it comes to soloing, I would say a good general rule with blues soloing is that passing tones can be added in between any whole step or interval of 2 frets. Now, with this pattern we're working with, it's been all whole steps. Every string is featured a whole step, so we can throw in a passing tone in between each of those intervals, or every string with the diagonal approach. Here's what I mean. There's a little example there. So the bottom line is just think of them as throwing a little off-center effect intentionally. It's a cool effect. You can work out all kind of variations on your own if you want with passing tones, but just remember, just throw in that middle finger note on any interval. That means every string within the diagonal approach, and it'll work. Now, if you want to try out your own slight variations, one thing to keep in mind is to focus on good phrasing. In other words, beginning and ending your riffs, at least initially to start, on the root notes. So if you come up with anything with the E diagonal, we have 2 root notes that if you're going to be creative and sort of meander around, give it a good root note focus, and you'll find that it simply sounds better. It sounds more cohesive when you're jamming along with the rhythm track. So focus on phrasing around the root notes, and that'll help you sound better when you try out your own variations. Now, compared to the beginning of this lesson when we started with just 3 riffs, we now have a lot more options or variations you can throw in to get familiar with this diagonal approach. And with the next clip, we'll have an E blues backing rhythm track again, but this time, instead of just 1 verse, 12 bars, which is what we did with the initial track, this one will extend out for 3 full verses. So it'll give you plenty of time to try out all these riffs. In addition, there will not be a guide track of myself playing the riffs. In other words, you can decide to play whatever you want, and that'll give you a better way to actually hear how you sound along with the backing rhythm track. And we will post the variations options that you see here to give you a reminder while you're playing. And the last option there, I have play riffs verbatim. In other words, if you hit a blank, which can happen while you're playing, you can literally go back to playing the riffs verbatim to sort of keep things going. And the thing is, you just got to jump in the water. You just have to play. You're going to make mistakes, but eventually happy accents happen. What I mean by that, you'll play a certain riff at a certain point. It just happens to sound really good with the particular chord played with the backing rhythm. But the only way to do it is to jump into it and try out variations. So good luck jamming along with the next clip. Now, this diagonal pattern or approach is movable. In other words, we can take all of the riffs we've learned so far and apply them to different keys by simply shifting up or down the fretboard from E. You might want to memorize sort of as a landmark that E is a home base. We start along the 5th fret position. However, the root note is on the 5th string, 7th fret for the diagonal pattern. So if we start from that root note and simply move up 1 fret, there's our root note F. We play the diagonal pattern around that, or the diagonal approach around that. That would be F blues. A blues, which is very popular in blues and rock. Well, starting from that E note, we would go E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. There's our root with our 3rd finger down. Play the diagonal pattern around that. There's A blues. Going the opposite way, we can also go down E, E flat, D. There's an example with the D blues diagonal. Starts along that 3rd fret position, but the root note is actually 2 frets higher on the 5th fret. So the perfect way to do it is to base it off the root note, but also since we started with E, you might already have that memorized that E is along the 5th fret. So even though that note on the bottom string 5th fret is not E, if you know that the E diagonal is on the 5th, say you need to find G, you could say, well, I know E's on the 5th fret because that's how I learned it. E, F, F sharp, G. Not necessarily a G note here, but there's a G note and there's your G diagonal. The next challenge with using the diagonal approach is to now combine it with what you already know, playing riffs within the standard box pattern, because they're not connected, at least not yet. The thing is, for example, in E blues, we have the E diagonal along the 5th fret, but we also have open E blues and E along the 12th fret. So if this is new to you, this whole diagonal approach, this is another sort of level up with as far as soloing goes, because anyone who first or looks at a guitarist play who doesn't know what they're doing, but they're watching someone, it's kind of a cool thing when you see someone playing and all of a sudden shifting down to different fret positions. Well, that's what we can do now with combining or shifting box patterns between them, between the diagonal and the regular standard box pattern. So if we have an E blues up here at the 12th fret, you get your bearings down. And what I mean by getting your bearings down, a lot of times before you start jamming, when you're new to playing this riff, you have to say, okay, where's my diagonal in the key I'm in? Okay, 5th fret position for E, 12th fret position for E. You kind of say that to yourself, get your bearings, and then when you're ready to start jamming, you can start doing that. Start shifting. Here's the open E. And you can kind of sort of connect that to the diagonal pattern. So with this shifting, that example was in E. You can go back and practice that along with the rhythm track we have in E from the previous clips. But let's do another example shifting. How about the key of A blues? Now with A blues, it's almost like a sort of an opposite effect here, because along the 5th fret we have our standard box pattern. Sounds a little off. We've been in E most of this lesson, but there's A blues. Now, where would the A diagonal be? Well, we covered this earlier. It would be from here. We know the A diagonal that we covered earlier is along the 10th fret. But going back to if you had to base it off the standard pentatonic box pattern, another sort of quick fix to know where the diagonal is from the root note. In this case, the root note is the bottom string A on the 6th string 5th fret. The diagonal pattern will always be either 5 frets higher or 7 frets lower. We can't go 7 frets lower in A, but we can go 5 frets higher. So that's another sort of trick to memorizing where the diagonal is in relation to the standard box pattern. So we have A blues, 5 frets higher, do a quick shift up using that. Let's give another quick example. How about C blues? C blues, as far as shifting patterns, if we start with our standard box pattern, C blues is along the 8th fret. Do you want to pause the video? If you want, you can do that right now to figure out where the C diagonal is. Otherwise, the C diagonal pattern, if we just base it off the 5 frets higher or 7 frets lower, we're not on electric. 7 frets lower from the 8th fret would be the 1st fret. C diagonal is along, whoops, I extended a little bit. We'll stick with what we already know so far. We're going to do an extension the next lesson. But there's our basic C diagonal along the 1st fret position. So if you were to jam in C, you get your bearings down, say C's along the 8th fret, C diagonal is along the 1st fret position. Now you'll see this diagonal approach applied to many classic blues and rock solos. Some examples being Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix, which is in E blues, so the diagonal approach along the 5th fret. The acoustic version of Layla by Eric Clapton, the opening solo, that's in D blues, so the D diagonal approach along the 3rd fret position. And a portion of the Stairway to Heaven guitar solo by Led Zeppelin, that solo is in the key of A blues, and it features a little portion of that, the A diagonal pattern along the 10th fret position. If we broke down one of those as an example, the intro solo to Purple Haze, there are some extra notes here, but I'm going to play it a little bit. There's an extra note, but here's the riff. The thing is, and there's a little extra note there, which I'll cover in a future lesson when we extend the pattern, but that pattern, that riff, is all based off this diagonal approach in E blues. So there's an example right there, and again, maybe you have already learned some of these solos, you copied them note for note, but maybe weren't sure of what scale or even what pattern was being applied. But this will also help you when it comes time to learn some solos, because as you're sussing it out, once you see a pattern, it makes it easier to learn or copy a solo as well. Once you have this lesson down, the next step will be to extend the diagonal approach to cover other parts of the fretboard. And for that video release, if you subscribe to Paluzzi Guitar, you'll get an update. Also, feel free to check out the various playlists I have for both blues soloing and blues rhythm lessons as well.